He had everything money could buy, except the sound of his daughter's laughter. His mansion was silent, his child was broken, and every doctor had already failed him. Then a barefoot boy from the streets crossed his gates, and the silence shattered forever. Sit back, relax, and click on the subscribe button.
Beyond the iron gates of one of the grandest estates in the city lived a man the world believed had everything. His name was Daniel Moreau. To the outside world, he was a legend, a billionaire whose name carried weight in shipping, energy, and real estate. Newspapers praised his intelligence. Investors trusted his instincts. Wherever Daniel Moreau placed his money, success followed. But behind those towering gates, beyond the marble floors and perfectly trimmed gardens, lived a man quietly falling apart, because no amount of wealth could restore what he had lost. His daughter, Amara, had once been the heartbeat of the estate. She was bright, curious, and full of laughter that echoed through the halls. She ran barefoot across the lawn, chased butterflies in the garden, and filled the mansion with a warmth money could never buy. And standing beside her, always smiling, was her mother, Sophia, Daniel's wife, his anchor, the one person who softened his sharp edges. Then, one night, everything ended. A single car accident shattered Daniel's world. Sophia never came home, and Amara survived, but not in the way anyone had prayed for. She was left paralyzed from the waist down, her small body trapped in a wheelchair, her childhood stolen in a moment of twisted metal and broken glass. From that day forward, silence ruled the estate. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the heavy, suffocating kind, the kind that settles into walls and refuses to leave. Amara stopped laughing. She stopped asking questions. She stopped believing in tomorrow. Most days she sat quietly in her wheelchair near the garden gates, staring through the iron bars as if watching a world she no longer belonged to. Daniel watched it all, powerless. At first, he fought the pain the only way he knew how, by throwing money at it. He summoned the best doctors money could buy. He flew Amara to Europe for experimental treatments, to Asia for advanced therapies, to America for specialists who promised breakthroughs. Private jets crossed oceans. Hotel suites turned into temporary hospitals. Every consultation came with hope, and every return came with silence. No miracle followed them home. Each time Amara seemed smaller, quieter. Her eyes dulled, her shoulders slumped, and her voice grew softer, as though she was slowly disappearing inside herself. Daniel would sit beside her at night, listening to the faint hum of machines and distant city sounds, wondering how a man who could move markets and shape industries could not fix his own child. The estate, once alive with laughter, became a monument to grief. Staff spoke in whispers. Footsteps echoed too loudly down long hallways. Sophia's favorite chair remained untouched. Daniel stopped hosting guests. Business calls were answered with short, distant replies. The man the world admired was surviving, but the father inside the mansion was breaking. Amara's wheelchair became her entire world. Each morning she was rolled into the garden for fresh air. Each afternoon she sat quietly, watching sunlight dance across the grass she could no longer run on. Children's laughter from neighboring streets floated faintly through the air, reminding her of everything she had lost. She rarely cried. The tears had already been used up. Instead, she existed in a quiet resignation far too heavy for a child her age. Daniel noticed the smallest changes, and they terrified him. She stopped asking when she would walk again. She stopped talking about her mother. She stopped dreaming. And in her silence, Daniel saw something far more dangerous than paralysis. He saw surrender. And so he continued chasing cures, not because he believed in them anymore, but because stopping felt like giving up. Each flight across the ocean was fueled by guilt, by love, by desperation. Each return to the estate felt colder than the last. Until one ordinary afternoon, without warning, without preparation, something changed. Not through medicine, not through money, but through something Daniel Moreau never thought to buy. And it all began the moment a barefoot boy slipped quietly through the iron gates.
One quiet afternoon, when the sun hung heavy over the city and the estate seemed frozen in its usual silence, a barefoot boy slipped through the iron gate. He moved carefully, instinctively, the way children of the streets learn to move when the world has taught them to expect punishment for being seen. His feet were dusty and scarred, hardened by years of walking on hot concrete and broken ground. His shirt hung loose on his thin frame, torn at the edges, its color long faded by sun and rain. His name was Elias. No one knew where he came from. No one had ever asked long enough to hear the answer. Some nights he slept under bridges where the air smelled of rust and damp concrete. Other nights he curled behind closed shops or unfinished buildings, listening to the city breathe while hunger twisted inside him. Hunger followed Elias everywhere, into his dreams, into his waking thoughts, into the slow ache in his bones. When the hunger became too loud, too heavy, Elias danced. Not because anyone taught him how, not because there was music. He danced because movement made the pain lighter, because when his body moved, his heart felt less trapped, because for a few moments he could forget that the world had no place prepared for him. That afternoon, as Elias wandered near the massive estate, something caught his attention through the gate. A girl. She sat alone in a wheelchair, small and still, her hands resting in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, as though she were afraid to look at the world beyond the garden. There was no laughter around her, no movement, just quiet. Elias stopped walking. He knew that look. It was the same look he saw in his reflection on nights when the city lights blurred from hunger and exhaustion, the look of someone who had stopped expecting joy. Her name he did not know, but her sadness spoke clearly. Without thinking it through, without planning, Elias stepped inside. He did not come to beg. He did not come to steal. He came with only one thought in his mind. If I dance, maybe she will smile. Slowly, cautiously, he began to move. At first his steps were small, unsure. Then he exaggerated them, swinging his arms too wide, bending his knees awkwardly, letting his body twist in ridiculous ways. He puffed his cheeks, crossed his eyes, pretended to lose his balance, then dramatically caught himself as if saving a grand performance. Amara looked up. She stared at him, confused, unsure. Elias leaned into the absurdity. He waddled like a penguin. He spun too fast and pretended to get dizzy. He tripped on nothing at all and fell onto the grass with an exaggerated groan, then popped back up with a grin that said, "Did you see that?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then a sound escaped Amara's lips, a small, startled giggle. Elias froze for half a second, his heart pounding. Then he smiled wider and danced harder. He rolled across the grass, kicked his legs in the air, bowed dramatically like a performer at the end of a grand show. Amara laughed again, this time louder. The sound surprised even her. It rose from deep inside her chest, breaking through months of silence. Her shoulders shook, her hands lifted instinctively, clapping without thought. The laughter spilled out freely, unguarded, as though it had been waiting for permission to return.
Elias felt something burst inside him. In that moment, he forgot the hunger, he forgot the streets, he forgot the cold nights and the endless days of being ignored. He was not a homeless boy. He was not invisible. He was making someone happy. And for Amara, something shifted. The garden no longer felt like a cage. The wheelchair no longer felt like the center of her world. In front of her was a boy who expected nothing from her. No bravery, no strength, no recovery, only laughter. And so she gave it, louder, freer, real. Neither of them knew it yet, but in that quiet garden, with one boy dancing and one girl laughing, something long thought impossible had just begun. Inside the mansion, Daniel Moreau was in the middle of another call he barely heard. Numbers were being discussed, deadlines, acquisitions, the kind of conversations he had mastered over decades. His voice was calm, controlled, distant, but his eyes kept drifting toward the garden below, as they often did, toward the space where silence lived. Then he heard it, a sound so unfamiliar that his body reacted before his mind could understand it. Laughter. Daniel froze. Not the polite kind of laughter guests forced at business dinners, not the hollow sound of television playing in an empty room. This laughter was raw, bright, alive. His heart slammed against his ribs. He ended the call without explanation and stepped onto the balcony, gripping the cold stone railing as if afraid the sound might vanish if he moved too quickly. Below him, in the garden, stood a sight that made no sense. Amara, his Amara, was clapping. Her head was tilted back slightly, her mouth open in uncontrollable laughter, her shoulders shaking with joy. Her eyes sparkled in a way he had not seen since before the accident. And standing in front of her was a boy, barefoot, thin, dirty, dancing like he had nothing to lose. Daniel's first instinct was rage. How did he get in? Where were the guards? What if he's dangerous? His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists. He opened his mouth, ready to shout, ready to end whatever this was before it could hurt her. Then Amara laughed again, louder. Daniel stopped breathing. He stayed hidden behind the balcony pillar, watching as the boy spun, tripped, bowed dramatically, then rolled across the grass like a clown performing on an invisible stage. The boy glanced at Amara constantly, adjusting his movements to her reactions, as if her laughter were the only thing guiding him. Daniel felt something twist painfully in his chest. For months, no, for years, he had begged doctors for this moment. He had paid fortunes, signed contracts, flown oceans, and yet here it was, happening without permission, without planning, without money. A miracle delivered by a child with nothing. Amara lifted her hands higher as she clapped. Daniel noticed it instantly. Her arms moved more freely than before. Her posture was straighter. Her face, once permanently shadowed, was glowing. When was the last time she moved like that? He wondered. The boy finished his routine with a dramatic bow, chest puffed out proudly. Amara laughed so hard she had to catch her breath. Daniel felt his eyes burn. He had promised himself he would never cry again, not after Sophia, not after the accident, not after the endless failures. But standing there, unseen, watching his daughter come back to life, the tears came anyway. The boy stepped back slowly, as if afraid the moment might break if he stayed too long. He gave Amara one last silly wave and turned toward the gate. That was when Daniel moved. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes. The boy froze. He turned slowly, eyes wide, body tense, ready to run. Daniel saw it then, the reflex of fear, the posture of someone used to being chased away. For a brief moment, Father and boy stared at each other. Amara spoke first. "Daddy, please don't send him away." Her voice was stronger than Daniel remembered. He looked down at her, really looked. Her cheeks were flushed. Her breathing was quick but excited. She wasn't retreating into herself. She wasn't distant. She was present. Daniel looked back at the boy. Up close, the details were impossible to ignore. The scars on his knees, the dirt beneath his fingernails, the exhaustion hidden behind alert eyes. This was not a threat. This was a child who walked through pain and chose joy anyway. Daniel lowered his voice. "What's your name?" Elias hesitated, then answered quietly. "Elias, sir." "Why are you here?" Daniel asked. Elias swallowed. "She looked sad. I thought maybe I could help." The words landed harder than any accusation ever could. Daniel felt the weight of every failed attempt, every empty promise, every night Amara cried herself to sleep, and standing in front of him was proof that healing had never been about force. It had been about connection. Daniel straightened slowly. "You can stay, for today." Elias blinked, unsure he had heard correctly. Amara smiled, and in that moment, Daniel Moreau realized something terrifying and beautiful all at once. This boy had already changed his daughter, and he was about to change everything else.
The garden no longer felt like a place of quiet observation. It felt like a stage. Every afternoon, at the same hour, Elias arrived. The guards no longer stopped him. The staff no longer whispered. Even the air itself seemed to wait. Daniel watched from a distance as laughter returned again and again, fragile at first, then confident, then unstoppable. Something else was changing too. Daniel saw it in the smallest details. Amara clapped harder now. Her hands no longer fell back into her lap when the laughter faded. She lifted her arms on her own, mimicking Elias's movements, her fingers stretching as if remembering something they had forgotten. She spoke more. She argued with Elias playfully. She demanded encores. Each laugh carved a little more fear out of her body. Doctors noticed. During routine visits, they paused longer, watching Amara's posture, her eye contact, her engagement. One of them finally said what Daniel had barely dared to hope. "Her motivation is back," the doctor explained. "That matters more than people think. Sometimes the body follows the mind." Daniel nodded, afraid to speak. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. The sun hung low, painting the garden in warm gold. Elias was in the middle of a routine, slow movements, exaggerated effort, as if the air itself had grown heavy. Amara laughed so hard she had to grip the arms of her wheelchair to steady herself. "Wait," she said suddenly. Her voice cut through the laughter. Daniel looked up. Elias stopped mid-step. "I want to try something," Amara said, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with determination. Daniel's chest tightened. He stood slowly, instinctively ready to stop her, to protect her from disappointment. He had seen hope rise and shatter too many times before. But Amara had already placed her hands on the armrests. Her fingers curled tightly. Her arms shook. The garden fell silent. Even the birds seemed to pause. Amara leaned forward, her face tightening as she pushed down with everything she had. Her shoulders lifted first, then her chest. Her breath came in sharp bursts. Nothing happened. For a terrifying moment, Daniel thought this would be another cruel lesson, another reminder of limits. Then her hips lifted, just slightly. Elias covered his mouth with both hands. Daniel stepped forward without realizing it. Amara held herself there, trembling violently. "One," Elias whispered. Her legs quivered, unsure, untrained, afraid. "Two," Daniel said, his voice breaking.
Every muscle in her body screamed. 3, Imara breathed, and then she collapsed gently back into the chair. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Elias shouted, "You did it!" He spun wildly, laughing and crying at the same time, dropping to his knees beside her like she had just won a championship. Daniel fell to his knees on the other side. He touched Imara's forehead with shaking hands, afraid she might disappear if he blinked. "You are brave," he whispered. "Do you know that?" Imara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I wasn't scared. When he dances, I feel like I can move." Daniel broke. Years of control shattered in that moment. He pulled her gently into his arms, his shoulders shaking as he cried, not from grief this time, but from relief. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't heavy. It was sacred. They didn't announce it. They didn't call reporters. They didn't rush to doctors demanding explanations. They simply kept going. More laughter, more movement, more courage. Each day brought tiny victories, an arm lifted higher, a leg held steadier, a smile that lasted longer. And with each step, Daniel felt something inside him heal as well. That night, after Imara had fallen asleep, Daniel walked alone through the garden. He stood where Elias had danced, where his daughter had stood for the first time since the accident. For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. And he knew, without doubt, that the boy who had once entered his estate with nothing had already given him everything that mattered.
The change inside the estate did not happen all at once. It unfolded quietly, in moments so small they might have been missed by anyone not watching closely. Mornings no longer began with silence. They began with Imara's voice echoing down the halls, calling Elias's name before the sun had fully risen. Breakfast was no longer a quiet ritual. It became a place of laughter, teasing, and stories from the day before. Daniel found himself pausing mid-conversation, realizing how long it had been since joy had felt natural instead of fragile. Elias no longer stood near the gates, unsure if he belonged. At first, he walked the halls carefully, barefoot, moving as if permission could be taken away at any moment. When shoes were given to him, he kept them beside his bed for days before wearing them. He ate slowly, respectfully, the way someone does when they remember what it means to go without. At night, he lay awake in a soft bed, staring at the ceiling, afraid that morning would undo everything. Daniel noticed all of it. He noticed how Elias always waited for Imara's laughter before starting his dances, how he never asked for more, even when more was offered freely, how loud voices made him tense, but gentle ones allowed him to relax. Daniel, a man once feared in boardrooms, found himself learning patience again, learning how to guide instead of command. The city noticed too. The story spread fast. Headlines questioned Daniel's judgment. Some praised his compassion. Others warned him of risk. Business partners pulled him aside and spoke of reputation, of image, of consequences. Daniel listened calmly. Then he answered once. "My daughter is standing again," he said. "That is the only proof I need." Imara answered the rest herself. "He's my brother," she told anyone who questioned it. "If you don't accept him, you don't accept me." Therapy sessions became victories. Elias counted every step Imara took. When her legs trembled, he held her steady. When fear crept back in, he danced until it disappeared again. Slowly, the wheelchair stopped defining her. It became something she used, not something that owned her. Daniel watched his daughter reclaim pieces of herself he thought were lost forever. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in gold and crimson, Imara took careful steps across the garden, Elias holding her hand. Daniel stood still, his chest heavy and full at the same time. For the first time, the mansion felt like a home.
Daniel once believed wealth was measured in numbers, in assets, in power, in control. But standing there, watching his daughter walk, really walk, he finally understood the truth. True wealth doesn't arrive in private jets. It doesn't come from doctors or contracts, and it cannot be bought no matter how much you have. True wealth arrives quietly, sometimes barefoot, sometimes hungry, sometimes dancing. It arrives when a child who has nothing chooses joy instead of bitterness, when a father learns that love is stronger than fear, when a broken house remembers how to breathe again. Daniel thought he had everything, but he had nothing, until a boy the world ignored walked through his gates and showed them all what real riches looked like. And maybe the greatest miracle wasn't that Amara stood. Maybe it was that 3 broken lives became a family.